It's made from things like ground dried seaweed and cottonseed meal and peanut hulls and ground oyster shells and rocks from the earth. It's a 7-course meal for your flowers. And I put some in at planting time because it's slow release. It doesn't make my flower take off and go kaboom the first week, but it has food for the plant for a long time, minerals for the plant for a long time. So you've got the right amount of sunshine, good soil, then you need moisture. Some plants love wet soils, some plants love dry soils. And it's good to know because you basically can't change how your soil's composition is too much, or not easily. Of course, you can water a plant that wants to be in a wet place, but it's hard to do that consistently. And if a plant doesn't like sitting in moist soil and you put it in moist soil, sometimes the roots will rot. So all I'm suggesting is that you do a little bit of homework. If you see something today and you write down, oh, I want to grow that one, I'll tell you a little bit about it, but also do a little research before you buy it so you don't waste your money. And of course, if you can, always buy more than one. I like to buy things in 3s, 5s, and 7s, usually 3s on a limited budget as I have. So let's start off in early spring. This picture was probably taken in early March, maybe even as early as March 4th. And this is a little bulb plant called a snowdrop. How many people here, put your hand up if you have ever grown snowdrops. They're lovely little things. They're not showy. They only stand 4 or 5 inches tall, but they are blooming in March. They actually have a chemical reaction they can do that brings out, that produces heat so that they can come up through frozen soil. I have shoveled snow away over my snowdrop patch and seen them come up through ice and snow in early March. And certainly by early April, they look like that. So that's a good one to think about. So there's a double snowdrop, which is fancier inside. Probably not worth the money because that little flower costs $1 a bulb, roughly. But if you're a bulb collector like I am, who wants to try everything that grows from bulbs, you might want one. So Scilla or squill is this little blue downward-looking plant, and it can be a very intense dark blue. It can be almost a purple, and it blooms a couple of weeks after your snowdrops. But again, it's only 3 or 4 inches tall. At the same time, we also have Glory of the Snow, or Chionodoxa. And this one I like because it looks up. It's a cheerful plant. The other one, the face is down, but if you see, the white center is the center of the flower, and it's looking up at me, it's smiling. So I like this one. And I find that it multiplies like crazy. If I plant 25, within 5 years, I might have 200. Here's another nice little early one, winter aconite. It's bright yellow, and it blooms about the time of the snowdrops. I've had great luck with it multiplying in my garden. All of these bulbs aren't too particular about whether they're sun or shade because there are no leaves on the trees when they're blooming. And usually all of the ones I just showed you will, they're called spring ephemerals. They're short-lived. Well, no, the bulbs last for a long time, but the greenery dries up and browns and it disappears. So you can have these in your lawn, and you don't have to worry about the lawnmower. If you plant daffodils in the lawn, the daffodils still have green leaves right now, for me anyway. So I don't plant daffodils in the lawn, but winter aconite, sure, put it in the lawn.
Would you say that also of the others that you've sown so far?
All of those grow in my lawn, yes.
Okay.
All the little guys. I don't plant crocus in the lawn, and I'm not sure why, but it's a lovely spring flower, much better known than all the ones you looked at. These are a very small blue one, Crocus Tomanasium. that is quite early. You're used to the giant Dutch hybrids probably, but if you get a good bulb catalog or go online and Google bulbs for sale, you will want to do that in midsummer or late summer, because by middle of the fall season, they have shipped their things and they're out of some of them. Here's a nice little wildflower called whoops, get back here, what are you doing? Called Bloodroot, which just shows up on my property, and the flowers close up at night and on cloudy days. They're saving themselves for the bumblebees, because early in the spring, that's the main pollinator. If you see a bee in early spring, you'll notice that it's a bumblebee and it's big and fat, and you'll say, wow. Well, only the queen bee survives the winter, and she has to go out and she's going to lay her eggs in the spring in the ground, and then she has to go out and get pollen and nectar so that she can feed the young bumblebees that are going to be her slaves, essentially, who are going to wait on her for the rest of their life. So they close up because the bumblebees aren't around on cold, rainy days. Now this is a very special one. This is a double bloodroot. Somebody gave that to me, and it's a quadruploid, which means that most flowers are diploids, which means they have 2 chromosomes in a pair, just like we do. But this has 4 chromosomes in a group, and because of that, it's sterile. So it stays open even on those cold, rainy days because it can't get pollinated. It's sterile, so it doesn't care about the bumblebees. Now, if you look at the lower right corner, what have I done? I dug up a quarter of it, and I moved that chunk of bulbs and plants. I actually did it when they were in bloom. I dug it up, and I moved it to a different place on my property, because that's the only way they can spread, is if we, they keep that patch is now much bigger than that. That patch is this big. But early on, I took a little chunk like this and I moved it somewhere else where it was more visible. So if you ever see them for sale, double bloodroot is a great thing. They don't need a lot of sunshine, so I have it growing in dappled shade. Now here's a nice early season plant, the Hellebores. They come in a variety of colors. They bloom early, and they bloom for a long time, up to 6 weeks. They'll have those blossoms. On the right, that's a nice dark one, and what you're seeing on the left is probably that dark one a month later, because they tend to fade out. But they're very, very nice. And they've been hybridized and bred by breeders, so you've got a number of different colors, but basically in pink, red, dark red, white. I once had a corgi who I named Daphne Missouri, which is the Latin name of February Daphne. But of course here it blooms in early April and into May. And it's a small shrub with very fragrant, intensely pink blossoms. It's not a native plant, it's from Japan, and I always tend to favor local native plants, but this is a good one because I'm looking for blooms early in the season. And I take sometimes before they start to bloom, I'll cut a branch off, put it in, or several branches, and I'll put it in a vase and they'll bloom in the house. Here is my favorite tree. Well, it's hard to say. It's one of my favorite trees, the Merrell Magnolia. So you can see on the right how big, you see my hand there, and you see how big that blossom is. That picture was probably taken on my birthday, which is April 23rd. So, end of April, the Merrell Magnolia blooms consistently for me 9 years out of 10. Sometimes it won't bloom until the next week, but to have something like that, there are probably 1,000 white blossoms. Each one is 4 inches wide, and they're lightly fragrant. The tree itself has beautiful glossy green leaves, and it looks good all summer. Then in the winter, it has the buds for the next year on it that look like pussy willows on steroids. So even in winter, the tree is doing something for me. Here's another magnolia. This is Jane. This is a hybrid. And, yikes. She blooms in May, but she continues to put out a few buds and blossoms once a month, all summer long, and here it is in September, which is a very unusual time to have a tree that's blooming. I keep Jane at about this height. She's not a big tree, but I just gave her a little pruning, and about this wide, so it's a nice yard tree. And there are a number of other magnolias named with women's first names, and there's a yellow one, a pink one, and a white one, and so forth, in that same series of magnolia hybrids. So look for them. Here's mountain laurel. It's blooming for me right now, and it's the state flower of Connecticut, which is where I grew up. It's an understory tree, which means it can grow in a forest, but not a dense pine forest. I remember there's a Sleepy Giant State Park in Hamden, Connecticut, not far from where I grew up. And there's an oak forest with high branches and fairly open canopy. And it's full, the understory is just full of mountain laurels. So for many years I was told that we were too cold here to grow mountain laurels, but I said, let's try one. And it worked. And then 10 years later, or 15 years later, we had an exceptionally cold winter and it died. So I got another one. You know, you have to be, if you want to have something you like, you have to be willing to, it's like having a dog. You know your dog, you're going to outlive your dog. But you still get a dog and you get another dog. And after Daphne passed on, I have a wonderful new dog. He's just under 2 years, and he's a cross between a golden retriever and an Irish setter. And talk about energy. Wow.
What did you name that one?
Rowan. R-O-W-A-N, which is the name of the European mountain ash. But I didn't pick his name. He came with that name. He was a year old when we got him. Here is one of my favorite shrubs, Fothergilla. It doesn't have a common name other than Fothergilla. And there it is blooming in May, but the fall foliage is spectacular. You know, you're not allowed to get burning bush anymore. It's considered an invasive species, although some of you have it. I know you do, even if you won't admit it. I'm not going to ask you to put up your hand and admit it. But the foliage colors here, I get red, purple, orange, and yellow on that one bush. And unlike a burning bush, this has great flowers in the spring. So why not get this one instead? Dig out that burning bush and put in one of those. Right now, my catalpa tree is just starting to bloom. The catalpa is really quite exceptional. And I bought it, it was about this tall. And it had a trunk 1.5 inches in diameter. I planted it, now 4 years later, it's a shade tree. It's 25 feet tall, it has a 15-foot canopy, and I have chairs under it for shade. I planted it in the middle of my lawn. And it's what I call a specimen tree. Something that is really special and has multiple reasons to love it. But it's mainly the flowers and the fact that this is a nice native tree that will bloom and please me and be a shade tree. Here's another one that would compete with burning bush. This is more the color. On the left you see the leaves in the fall, and on the right, if you look at my middle finger there, see that thing that looks like a spider, sort of a red spider? That's the blossom, which it blooms in October. Even after the leaves fall, sometimes y'all have these blossoms. A lot of trees and shrubs, and all flowering plants, are looking for their little market niche. They can't compete with all the other flowers. If all the flowers bloomed at once, where would the bees go? Well, they would pick the showiest and the one with the most food. But something like this, it's not so showy. It's a small blossom. It's really only the size of a green pea. Well, a little bigger than that. The center is that size. Anyway, it's half an inch or under. Compared to a peony, that's nothing. Not particularly fragrant, but it finds insects that will pollinate it. Hydrangeas. Everybody has hydrangeas. Everybody loves hydrangeas. The pink diamond hydrangea is a particularly good one because the branches are nice and stiff. You know, some of the hydrangeas get these big floppy white heads that are so heavy when it rains the branches go right to the ground. Annabelle is one of those. They like full sun, they like good soil, but they're not too fussy. And this pink diamond I've had for many years has more open panicles or flower clusters, so they don't tend to flop and they have nice color. But there are lots of them. Go to your local nursery and talk to them about hydrangeas because they bloom in summer, not first thing, but midsummer and late summer. Here's an interesting plant called gas plant. It's hard to get established. It takes a while to get settled in, but it is the most fragrant flower I have. I have a friend who's blind, and one of her favorites is this one. It's a very citrusy smell, particularly in the evening. So if you have it planted somewhere near where you hang out at dusk, it's nice because it blooms for a number of weeks and it's really very fragrant. And it wants full sun, but it'll take some shade. All right, somebody asked me about lady slipper orchids. The little pink ones are very specific in their soil requirements and the requirements for a fungus that grows in the soil in extremely acid soils. Most of us don't have the right environment for a pink lady slipper. But this is what's called a showy lady slipper, and I was able to buy potted a showy lady slipper. They're not cheap. You would expect to pay $50 to $100 depending on the size of the pot of orchid. And they're not fast growing. The one I have right now is actually a pure white one. That one died. May she rest in peace. I have one where the lower part, instead of being pink, is white. I think I like the pink better, but when I bought it, I didn't know it was going to be white. But I've had it now for about 5 years. It's blooming today. This is also blooming for me today, the Himalayan blue poppy, or Meconopsis. And the photograph doesn't do it justice, but this flower is the color of the sky on a spring morning. It is really spectacular. You'd probably have better luck ordering seeds from a catalog than you would in finding a plant for sale. There are specialty nurseries, mainly in Vermont, that do sell these occasionally as small potted plants. It wants the same environment as that lady slipper orchid and as the primroses that I'll show you in a minute, which is they've done the best for me in the shade of old apple trees. I think the leaves from the apple trees tend to compost into the soil. I don't rake them up. They like a relatively moist soil, but not soggy, but it never wants to be real dry. And dappled sun. Morning sun, dappled afternoon sun. But it's a truly spectacular plant. And I was told once that it is the most difficult plant to grow and keep and get to bloom in New Hampshire. So I'm quite proud of that. At your garden center, you can get cocoa yams or Colecochee yams. Well, this thing is out to get. That's not a great photo, but the purple leaf thing in a pot in the bird bath. Now, I have found that birds don't actually use bird baths. They prefer to shower. Well, actually, they prefer my stream. Why would we go to a bird bath that we're not familiar with when there's a perfectly good stream nearby? So maybe how many of you have bird baths that birds use? Well, you're better than me. Anyway, this yam, which I knew from West Africa when I was a young man. I was in the Peace Corps in West Africa, and we were served yams on a regular basis. They like a wet environment, and this one works best if its feet are actually in water. So I decided one year, well, I'm going to take that and put it in the bird bath and see how it does, and it did fine. But it likes hot sun, and it never wants to dry out.
Do you bring it in the winter, or?
Yes, absolutely. Good question. I don't live in the climate I did when I was a young man. It's quite different. So let's look at some iris. The Siberian iris has the really narrow green leaves. The bearded iris have the wider, lighter green leaves. They like full sun, good soil, and they come in lots of colors, particularly the bearded iris. I have a friend that grows something like 300 different colors of iris. And here's a bearded iris. Here's some more. That one on the left is almost black, which is a tough color to find in a plant. Now here are the Japanese iris, which like the Siberian have very narrow leaves, but their petals, the ones that are out to the side, are almost horizontal, whereas the first one I showed you, they're more upright. So they like water. They want wet soil, and will actually, I've seen them growing in the Japanese garden in Portland, Oregon, growing in standing water. Now here's a great plant. I bet everybody here has seen a foxglove. And it's interesting that foxgloves have nothing to do with foxes. The name foxglove is from the German, which meant folk glove, or folk finger. It's about little fairies, and these are little gloves for fairies, one at a time, I guess. But it's a biennial, which means that after this bloom, it's not going to come back. So it's blooming this year, and then it's dead. There's nothing I can do about it, except when the flowers have all bloomed, and they bloom up from the bottom, you can see there's still lots of buds that haven't bloomed yet. When they're all done and dry, I'll clip it off, and I'll take it like a little wand, and I'll shake it over a prepared garden bed, and the seeds will fall in there. Usually in a flower bed, I'll just rake back the mulch, and just let lots of seeds fall on the ground, and a few of them will actually make a little rosette of leaves the following year. And I've learned to identify the color of the leaf. So when I'm weeding, you have this little leafy thing on the ground. Well, is that a foxglove, or is that just an ordinary weed? But that's a good way when you're gardening to pay attention to the color of the leaves, particularly for biennials.
Aren't they poisonous to pets?
They produce digitalis, which is a heart stimulant, which is actually in olden days was used as a medicine in the United States. And I think it would be a rare cat that would eat one of these, but if you were worried about your cats, then you probably shouldn't grow them.
Well, I also I was gifted a Logelia,
Mm-hmm.
a bush with a little red. My cat ate all of the blossoms off of it.
Bad cat.
Yes. But
That's interesting.
he's still alive. He's 12, so I don't know if, but I heard that not to plant foxglove.
Well, I would ask Mrs. Google.
I love Mrs. Google.
Mrs. Google has a lot of information. She knows more than I do.
All right.
So I've mostly been showing you perennials, then this biennial. Now here's an annual that I just love. Annual poppies. Last fall, for one of my clients, I took a bed from here to the door, and as wide as this table. And in the summer, I put down cardboard on the lawn. We cut the lawn real short. I put down cardboard, and then I put about 6 inches of soil and compost over that to kill the grass. And then in the fall, I took wildflower seeds, and I just went like this. I walked next to the bed, and I take out a handful, shake them out, and let all those seeds go down. And the seed mix that I got had a lot of annual poppies. Yellow ones, which are the California poppies usually, and orange ones, and pink ones, and yellow ones, and purple ones. Poppies are wonderful. And they don't ask much, they don't take a lot of space. Oh, after I put down all the seeds, then I took a tamper, which is a piece of metal this side with a rod coming up here, and I lightly packed down the seeds. But many wildflower seeds need sunshine to germinate. They don't need to be buried. If you put an inch of soil over them, they think they don't have a chance of making it, so they don't start. So just on the surface, and I patted it down. You could, if you had a small space, just pat it down. You've got wildflower seeds here. Try a small little bed. Get it weed free. Of course, weeds showed up in that wildflower bed. What the weeds didn't know is that I know the weeds. And I know them by their leaves and their color. So even before they ever bloomed, I pulled them out. But even if you don't, that's one of my favorite ones with the black dots in there. Here's another. So now, if you have really crummy soil, this plant would love you. Eryngium or sin holly likes it hot and dry, and it needs crummy soil. But I don't have any sunny, crummy soil to speak of. So I would plant it in what I thought was pretty ordinary ho-hum soil, and I didn't give it any fertilizer, and it would bloom that year and then die. So finally, I went to where I parked my truck, and underneath it, it was sort of gravelly and sandy, and I got a half a bucket of that stuff, and I made a hole, and I filled up the hole with really the worst soil I could imagine, and I planted one of these in there, and it survived.
Don't you run it over?
Well, I didn't plant it there. I planted it in my main garden, but I gave it the soil it wanted. And again, we're talking about how you have to read up on things. If you fail, and I failed a number of times with Eryngium here, sea holly, until I finally, it got through my thick skull, this wants really crummy soil. Everything I see says sandy, dry, nutrient poor soils. Okay, we can try to make some of that, and it worked.
Is it a perennial?
It is, and I have one right now that is just about to bloom. So mid-July, and it's really quite remarkable. It can also be used as a dry flower. If you cut the stem and hang it in the kitchen, you can have dry flowers all winter. So here's some poppies that are called single poppies because they don't have so many petals. So as you see on the right with the one that's open, it's just a single row of petals. If it rained, that doesn't have any weight to it to fall down, to flop and break the stem. The way so many of our favorite poppies, like the Festiva maxima I talked about, which do flop over.
It says peonies.
What did I say?
You said poppies.
I meant peonies, thank you. Somebody's awake here. The rest of you wake up, hello? This is Henry. No Susan. So here's the one I was talking about.
That's like the one I left.
The Festiva maxima. But it does flop down. So the trick to this one is put stakes around it before it blooms and take a piece of green string or yarn or something and encircle the plant so that when it gets wet, the branches don't break. You'll notice there's an ant right there. And in the old days, people seem to think that the ants were needed to open up the peonies, but that's not true. What the ants are there for is to get the aphids that are on your peonies, and that's why they're there. And they get the excrement of the aphids is sweet, and they like that. Now,
what kind of light does this need?
full sun.
Full sun.
Full sun, which is full sun is defined as 6 hours. If you have 8 hours, all the better, but you need 6 hours of sunshine for full sun. So this wants full sun, rich soil, and because that poppy we're looking at there may well be the very one that from my grandmother's garden, which was dug up 100 years ago. No, not quite. From 1954. So 70 years plus however years she had. So it's probably a 100-year-old plant. So when you plant it, you want to add compost and ProGrow or some other organic fertilizer. You want to make really nice soil because it's going to be there forever unless you dig it up and divide it. If you want to dig it up and divide it, the best time is in the fall after the leaves have started to die or senesce. And then these roots are like tubers, like little yams. And you can break them apart, and from one big clump of tubers, you could make 20 different new plants. But of course, it would take some years before they were big enough to blossom and produce the 25 to 50. I've had up to 60 blossoms on one plant.
How much fertilizer would you put in the hole when you plant it?
I would, if a slow grow organic fertilizer, I would use half a cup. Good question. Now here is garden treasure. This is an Ito peony, and probably not many of you have this. Does anybody have an Ito peony besides me? We have one person. Good. It's a cross between a perennial peony and a tree peony, and it's a very expensive plant, $50 to $75 for a potted Ito. But a mature Ito will again give you 50 or 60 blossoms over multiple weeks, and it will make a plant that's this big. I actually built a raised bed just for my Ito peony, a wood-sided raised bed, because I was in a place that was a little too moist, and I wanted it to be raised up a little bit so it drained better, and it's been very happy.
Could you talk about the depth of the peony when you put it in the ground?
That's another great question.
Thank
Thank you. Peonies are very fussy about how deep they're planted. In general, if you get one and you buy one in a pot, it's probably planted right, which means that the eyes or the little nibs, which are just below the soil surface, are at the right depth. But you're doing all this improvement on your soil. You're digging a hole that's this wide for a pot that's this size, and you're adding compost and cow manure. And if you don't pack it down well, everything will sink. And then dirt from the side of the hole will fall in, and you'll mulch it. And pretty soon those little eyes, which are just below the surface, are this deep, and it won't bloom. So if you buy a peony and it blooms the first year, or it's blooming when you bought it, and mostly we buy peonies when they're in bloom because they're so beautiful we can't walk by them, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure to scratch away the soil a little bit and see if you've got too much soil. If it is, just pull the soil back, or that's the way to do it, rather than digging up the whole plant and adding soil at the bottom. Just pull it back and make sure that the soil and mulch is not too deep. 3/4 of an inch to an inch is good. 1.5 to 2 inches of cover over the eyes of the peony, the little nibs, the little buds that are going to be next year's stems and flowers, is too much. Okay, so this primrose, Primula kissawana, or as my wife Cindy says, Primula, I want to kiss ya, is a great flower that spreads by root, but it doesn't cause problems with other plants. If you've got something else growing and its root comes to it, you'll take a right-hand turn and go that way and go around it. But that clump right there probably started from one plant, and that's what it looks like 5 years later. Again, perfect soil for it. It's moist, it's under an old apple tree, it gets partial sun. The trouble with Primula kissawana is it's hard to find for sale. But if you ever see one for sale, buy it. It's a wonderful plant, and you'll be giving away divisions to your friends, and people will love you.
What did you say at first was the type of plant?
This is a primrose.
Primrose.
Yes, Primula is the Latin name for primrose, and this one doesn't have a common name, it just has the Latin name. But here's the queen of my garden, really, the candelabra primrose, or Japanese primrose. They bloom in that same dapple shade, rich soil, moist. It comes up about this high and blooms with like a wagon wheel, with the spokes coming out and blooming at the end. And then it grows another 4 inches, 5 inches, and does it again. And the next week it goes up another 4 inches and does it again. And it does it 5 times. So starting in late May until today, we're just finishing up the last of these things, and they drop seeds and they grow like crazy. So this area that I have in my garden is as big as this, going that whole area. That's all started from 7 primroses that I got back in the 90s, and then another 6 that I got in the 2000s. And I have probably 1,000 of these plants, or 500. Let's be conservative. 500 primroses blooming with essentially just the effort of weeding from time to time. So we had a problem with, well, every year we have jewel weed that gets in there, but that's not really a problem because it pulls so easily. But we had buttercups that got in there, and they started choking things out. And so my wife Cindy, who is the best weeder in the world, is why I married her, because I do the cooking, but she can weed. Boy, she loves weed. She weeds till 9 o'clock at night most nights this time of year. She went in there this week and got the buttercups out, and they have really quite a tenacious root. So if you see buttercups in your garden, oh, buttercups, how sweet. I remember buttercups when I was a kid. I let them go. But they get into a bed and they can really be tenacious. So don't let those buttercups sweet talk you. So there's a close-up of the garden with there's just a couple right in front that are blooming. Now, we all love lilies. Asiatic lilies, oriental lilies, but we can't grow them where I am because of this, the lily leaf beetles.
Is that what that is?
Yes, that red pest is from another continent, and you know, as an organic gardener, I tell you, don't spray. I say, pick them off. And I did this for years, trying to keep my lilies bug-free, because these things can just eat. Well, you can see what they're doing. That's eaten out by the beetles, and their larvae are disgusting because they carry their excrement on their backs to deter birds. It also deters gardeners. You don't want to touch these things, they're nasty. I mean, yeah, you can wear surgical gloves and do it, but I found even picking twice a day, I could not keep up, so I just stopped growing lilies. How many of you still can grow lilies? Anybody? A few.
I just got a couple of bulbs last year, and they're about to bloom.
Great.
But I had a couple of the red lily.
Yeah, well, try picking them and hope for the best.
Yeah.
But here's what I do instead of lilies. I grow angel's trumpet, which is also known as datura. And you look at that blossom, the close-up there on the right, that's pretty much an oriental lily. It's not fragrant like an oriental, but look at this plant. Right now there are 5, 6, 7 blossoms in, but then there, if you look carefully, you've got blossoms coming in various places, and it blooms all summer. Once it starts blooming, the plant gets bigger and bigger and blossoms and blossoms. So, and the lily leaf beetles are not interested. So that's my compromise. And I buy one of these in a pot every year at the garden center where I go, and it costs me $7 or $8 maybe. But it gets to be a big plant like that, and it blooms and blooms its full head off. So that's a fun plant to have. What you need to know is this one is poisonous. It's psychoactive, it'll make you crazy if you eat the seeds. So if you don't like your husband, grow one of these and put it in his coffee. Tell him it's a new kind of coffee. I don't know how poisonous it is, but I know that it affects the brain. I've never had any desire to find out. Now here's one you know and love,
Oh, yeah.
Bee balm, everybody grows bee balm, and if you read anybody's garden book, it'll say, grow it in full sun. Except my book says, grow it in morning sun. And I say that because I find that bee balm gets baked in the hot afternoon sun.
Mhm.
Now, if you have really rich, moist soil, yes, you can grow it in full sun. And I do that because I have lots of rich, full sun. But for the average person, morning sun is best. And that bumblebee will be to your house soon. So here's a picture just behind my primrose garden. There is a patch of bee balm. You wonder about that white pillar. There used to be a Greek temple there. No. I was driving down the road in Cornish one day, and there were the two white pillars that were by the side of the road. So I was in my truck. I slammed on the brakes, pulled over. And I said to the guy, "You selling these pillars?" He says, "No, I'm trying to get rid of them. You want them?" I said, "Yeah." So I load them in the back. You only see one here, but I have a pair of them. And it offsets. Again, a garden should be fun and should have elements that are beyond flowers, I think. So, there you go. A stilby. People say this is a shade plant. I grow that in full sun, but the soil is plenty moist. If you have good, moist, full sun, you can grow it out there. You'll get much more, you get bigger plants and more blooms and happy plants with full sun and moist soil. But you can grow it in dry shade. It's just not as happy and it's slower growing. But it's a great cut flower. You put that in a vase and it'll last a while. Here's another biennial, rose campion. So it blooms and then that one will die, but in the same place where this is growing, right now I have maybe 25 or 50 little plants that are only about this size from a plant that was growing there last year. And it dropped seeds, and I deliberately let the seeds fall on the soil. I deliberately don't have any mulch around it so that it will start some new babies. So I will then take these babies and I will move them because, again, I recognize, look at that leaf, it's kind of grayish green. I recognize the color, and I also remember that I had rose campion here last year. So I have all these babies that I can dig up and move and place somewhere else. Okay, giant fleece flower. It's not for you unless you have a very big garden. That is much taller than I am. It's a perennial flower, and it's in a clump that gets bigger every year. I tried moving it once, and it was very, very serious roots. It took me a lot of work to get it to move. But because I am a garden writer, I have to try things so that I can write about them, and so I can come here and talk to you and tell you about them. Here's my favorite black-eyed Susan, except it's a green-eyed Susan, Prairie Sun. Now, black-eyed Susans, or Rudbeckias, that's their Latin name, is Rudbeckia, are very popular, generally have a brown center. This one will start blooming in August for me and bloom right through frost, which is much longer than most others. But it's not fully hardy for me. I usually have to buy a few plants, and the nurseries are getting better about selling it. When I first discovered it 15 years ago or so, it was very rare to find any. But now it's pretty common. So look for that one. And if you can buy it in a 6-pack or a 4-pack, get the little guys that grow fast and they'll bloom like crazy. And then they probably won't, even if it says perennial, you'll probably have to buy some the next year if you want plenty. Castor bean is fun too. Castor oil, I don't know, some of you probably remember taking castor oil as a kid. It comes with these purple leaves and it comes with green leaves, but it'll stand 5 feet tall, 6 feet tall. The first frost will kill it right to the ground. It'll just implode and fall to the ground weeping, and I do too. First frost is always a sad day.
How do you define that leaf shape?
That is a palmate leaf, or you could say it's a maple leaf type. It's not exactly a maple leaf, but some of them are as you look at it, but it's palmate. Palmate like the palm of your hand. Okay, then red milkweed or swamp milkweed is one that doesn't spread by root, which is nice because the common milkweed, we all need to grow some common milkweed for our monarchs because we're trying to keep the monarchs going. So I have a little garden that's maybe twice the size of that table, or 3 times the size of that table. And I just grow milkweed in it. It's the common milkweed. And it's surrounded by lawn. It's an island because it wants to go. But if it comes in and pops up on the lawn, it's going to get mowed over. So it contains it. This is another milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, which, as you can see, is a pretty flower. And is also a milkweed that the monarchs like. But the monarchs need not just milkweed, they need lots of fall flowers. You know, if somebody's going to run a marathon, they bulk up on carbohydrates before the race the night before. How many of you run a marathon? Not me either. But I know that if I were to do one, I could eat all the spaghetti I wanted the night before and not gain any weight. So we have to have fall blooming flowers so that before they take off on their voyage, and hope that people south and west of us will also be growing fall blooming flowers that will give them the carbohydrates they need for the energy to fly to Mexico.
Where can you get the milkweed? I mean, I've heard that about monarchs, but is it?
That's a great question. Where can you get milkweed? It doesn't dig up very easily from the roadside. So the best thing to do is probably get some milkweed seeds. And probably plant them right in the ground. Again, dedicate a little garden beside this table maybe that you can keep them from taking over your world because you don't want nothing but milkweed. So that's the common milkweed. And then something like the red one you just saw, you buy that at a garden center. And you'll buy it as a plant that's already this big and then kaboom, it's a great plant.
There was, I live down the road in front of the Methodist church that's on 11A going that way. They tell us that there was this dam there and there were all this milkweed there and somehow the dam got blown up or torn down or something and it flooded and all the milkweed was gone, so that was the habitat for the monarchs right there.
Well, that's too bad.
It is, yeah.
Now, goldenrod has a bad name. People seem to think that goldenrod gives you hay fever. It doesn't. Goldenrod has very sticky pollen, and it is actually blooming at the same time that other fall weeds are blooming that are giving you hay fever. Not all goldenrod spreads by root either. If you buy goldenrod at a garden center, you're going to find one that'll stay in a clump. And it's important for fall pollinators who need food to have things like goldenrod, which will be feeding them at the end of the season. And the best of all is a goldenrod called Fireworks, which comes up and sprays out like this. It's about this tall, it comes up. It's like fireworks. It's a great plant. Wisteria is a nice plant. It's blooming for me right now. Purple flowers. They smell like cat pee. So they're really not good for cut flowers in the house. Especially with that cat you were talking about.
I got plenty of that.
There are only 2 types that will bloom in New Hampshire. Blue Moon and Amethyst Falls are the only 2, at least, that I know of. Most of the old-fashioned wisteria that people tried, brought up from Connecticut, don't work because they bloom on old wood. The buds are set the fall before, so the winter kills the buds. These 2 bloom on new wood, which means they set out a new shoot, and on that shoot they'll then form a bud. It will turn into a blossom. Fall blooming clematis is a great one, and that same trellis in a different year. You can sell them younger and thinner. And that plant died. It got to be that vigorous, and then one spring it did not come back.
Oh,
But I planted it again. I have other things. I have the Wisteria there, and I have some other clematis, spring clematis, and I have a fall bloomer that's just getting established. There's a bush clematis right there. I have to have a trellis in front of that to keep it from flopping over. You could do it with stakes.
Do you fertilize that climber?
I don't fertilize much except at planting time. So I don't go around to all my perennials. I have too many perennials and too big a garden to worry about fertilizing. So I want plants to be pretty independent. So here's my favorite biennial weed, Teasel. And it's very prickly. You probably can't see from there, but all up and down the stem, these little tiny prickles. And then this thing, in the old days, was used in the process of carding wool.
oh,
And they would collect them and put them in some kind of a frame, and they'd run it over wood to bring up the nap. But here as it is in winter, and it just stands up tall and proud, it looks so beautiful against the snow. So corn farmers in the Midwest hate it. I love it. There are lots of different purple cone flowers for sale out there. I say get the old-fashioned pink or purple one. The orange ones, the yellow ones, the white ones are not nearly as hardy. Phlox is often plagued by mildew and mold on the leaves, but they have now, by selective breeding, some of them are resistant to mold or mildew. David is one of them. He's that white one there. It gets to be about this tall, and when the clump gets to be about this size, you need to divide it, or there's just not enough air circulation. Even David will get mildewy unless I divide that clump and give it more air, and it always wants to be in full sun.
When's the
Does
best
it
time?
respond well in a major cutback?
Do they respond well?
Yeah, if you cut them off, do they come back up from the root?
Yeah. Yeah.
And when should you divide? When's the best time?
When you have the time and energy, it's a big project. I would say in the spring. Meadow rue or thalictrum. Here's one called lavender mist that I sometimes get 8 or 10 feet tall. And it doesn't need to be staked because the stems are really very sturdy. It starts blooming in August, full sun. But I also have it growing down by my barn where it only gets morning sun, and it does quite well. You all know daylilies, and there are different kinds and different colors. They're all wonderful. The common orange ones people tend to throw by the side of the road, and they grow. Snake root is another great plant that bees love. Here's the purple leafed one, Black Beauty. And again, it'll set up a stalk that's this tall. The leaves will stay down about waist height, full sun, and the bees just love it. If you plant if you have a stone wall and you can plant snake root behind the stone wall, it's really a very distinctive look as it comes up and sort of dangles over the wall. Here's goat's beard, Aruncus. That's blooming for me right now, and it'll take part shade to full shade. It'll also do pretty well in full sun, and it comes in different heights. It's a wonderful plant. Cardinal Flower is a wildflower, Lobelia cardinalis, brilliant red. And it likes moist soil, but it will grow on ordinary garden soil if you keep it moist when it's first starting. It's supposed to be a perennial, but oftentimes it only lives 2 or 3 or 4 years. But if you let it go, drop its seeds, and there's not too much mulch around it, you'll get some babies that will come up and continue the lineage. Here's a close-up of the flower. Alliums are great members of the onion family. The one you see there was growing at Kew. There were thousands of them at Kew Gardens in London. I was the flower show in London at the Chelsea Flower Show a few years ago, and I had to take a picture of that. But I grow them, and they come in different heights and sizes. There's one called Millennium, which is a short one that is a late summer bloomer. Most of these big, tall ones are early summer, full sun. So here's another biennial, Angelica, and you can see the close-up with the 2 bees on it. The bees just love Angelica, and I had that in my front bed, but it's hard to find in the trades. Full sun. Turtlehead is a great pink flower that grows about this tall in moist places. Now it'll grow and dry in a regular garden soil, but if you have a moist place or a low spot, it spreads by root, and I'll show you what it does. That's a big clump at the edge of my primrose garden, and the bumblebees go inside there and they start buzzing and making noise. I don't know if they're mad or if they're happy or if they're drunk, but they go inside. It's hard. They have to pry open the mouth, and they get in there, and then I think they can't get out easily, and they're making noise like, "Mama, help!" Delphinium is one of my favorite early summer flowers, but if you look closely at that picture, you'll see that there are wooden stakes next to every single one, a bamboo stake, because it falls over in the rain. Here's another plant with no common name, Astilboides tabularis. Tabularis is Latin for, is derived from the word for a table. And it is really a very spectacular, those leaves are over 2 feet across. Again, hard to find in the trades, but if you see one, you might want to try it. It'll take shade. It needs some moisture. When we have a dry period, I actually water. It's the only perennial that I water because those leaves just collapse and fall on the ground whimpering, and then I give them water and they sit up again and act right. Now, we all love roses. I just buy knockout roses these days because they've been bred in a way that they don't get powdery mildew, they don't get black spot, they don't attract Japanese beetles because they don't have any scent. So I like a scented rose, an old-fashioned rose, and I actually have a few, but mostly these things are foolproof. They keep on blooming right through hard frost. Okay, here's another one with no common name, Nautia Macedonia. And it gets to be about 24 inches tall. It throws seeds, and you'll find volunteers in various parts downhill. It keeps on blooming pretty much all summer. It's a wonderful plant. And there's a climbing hydrangea on my barn. It likes the north side of a barn or a place where it gets some morning sunshine, but it doesn't need sunshine all day. In fact, it does better on the north side of a barn. It'll attach itself to brick or stone, but not to wood. So I had to tie it onto the barn at first, and then I found out that there were cracks between the boards. It went through the cracks and bloomed inside the barn. That's a good plant. Here's some hollyhocks that just happened to show up in my garlic bed. They're wonderful plants. They're biennials, most of them, at least by the book, though I found that many hollyhocks are very perennial. If they're in a happy place, they'll keep coming back. And I also, here's a trick. If you have a hollyhock, when it's finished blooming, cut it off right at the ground level, right after it's finished blooming. And then it has this moment, a senior moment, when it says, wait a minute, did I have babies this year? And you know, you've harvested the seeds, you've shaken the seeds out on the ground, perhaps, but if the roots are there and they're not sure if they've sent any seeds out, they will come back the next year. Here is another great Rudbeckia or black-eyed Susan. This one is called Henry Eiler, and this blooms into October. It's a big plant, 6 feet tall. I've got a clump that's this big around. But look at those petals, aren't they wonderful? There's so many different kinds of black-eyed Susans. So that's it. I was driving down the road, saw that, and had to stop and take a picture. All right, let me answer a few questions for you. I know it's after 4 o'clock. I love to talk to you, but first of all, feel free to go. If you've got another appointment, you know, the dog is at the daycare or your granddaughter needs to be picked up somewhere, just get up and go, my feelings will not be hurt. But I'll answer your questions for a while.
Does the Henry Isler attract butterflies?
I assume so, but I've never really remarked on it, but it must. It's got plenty of pollen, so sure. Yeah. Yes?
I don't use anything to deter the bugs either. I had these little slugs on my Chinese lanterns, and I just picked them off and put them in a jar. You need to empty the jar right away because they smell.
Yes.
I
Yes.
didn't realize that. I can't get those red bugs, those lily bugs, so how do you take care of that?
Well, I don't grow the lilies anymore. I just grow that other plant that I showed you that tour.
Right, okay.
But my wife came home with 3 lilies yesterday, so I will be planting them tonight. But we'll see. You know, maybe the lily leaf beetles have gone away. They've gotten discouraged at Henry's house because he doesn't have any lilies.
Come here.
And maybe I'll have you know, a few years before they discover that we grow them, and then they'll eat them up, and we'll say, okay, we're not replacing them. But they're so nice.
On the lily bugs, I had them as well on my lilies and was getting pretty frustrated for the past couple of years. And I never saw them until this year. I didn't know what was happening to my lilies. So I saw them this year. Well, I looked up online, red bugs, I didn't even know what they were. So long story short, the suggestion was to use Dawn dishwashing or any dishwashing detergent, a little bit of oil, not olive oil, like a vegetable oil, and some baking soda.
And lots
I
of
said,
water. Yeah.
well, I'll try that, right?
Yeah.
So I was pretty much at them. I was like, you're not getting my lilies this year, right? So after a couple days of really spraying that on there, it worked. I
Wow.
have big buds on my lilies this year.
Well, good for
So,
you.
Yeah. So I did it for like 2 days, really was tenacious about it, spraying the stem and underneath the leaves and whatnot. And they budded up and I won.
Great. So what's the proportion in a
I have like a little spray bottle.
Yeah.
Like this big
16 ounce.
dollar store, you know.
yeah, 16 ounces?
Filled it up with water, a
Yeah.
tablespoon of oil, tablespoon of each. Tablespoon of oil, tablespoon of the baking soda. Actually, no, a teaspoon of the baking soda.
Yeah, that sounds more like
Yeah, a teaspoon.
Yeah, the oil is the surfactant
It'll
that
stick
makes it stick to the
Yeah.
surface
Yeah.
and the.
It worked, so.
Great.
And how much of the Dawn
Tablespoon,
tablespoon?
yeah.
And a tablespoon of
Yeah, so tablespoon, teaspoon.
oil and then a teaspoon of the baking soda. Yes.
Cool. From a total novice, what do you do in the fall with a perennial garden?
Good question. What do you do in the fall? I leave things that the finches can eat, the seeds that the finches would like in the winter. So my Henry Isler Rudbeckia, for example, that big tall black-eyed Susan, I'll leave that. Purple coneflower, I'll leave that. Anything that has seeds on, I'll leave. The rest of it, I take either a little hand scythe and cut down the things down low, or I'll use, my wife likes to just use her pruners to cut everything back.
And do you let them dry completely then, if possible, or, I mean, can they still be quite green, or they're no longer flowering, so it's time to cut them, or?
It really depends on when I have time.
Okay.
Anytime after they've flowered, you can cut them down. If they have seeds, then those are nice for the birds. A lot of your beneficial insects like to have leaf litter and fallen flowers on the ground to lay their eggs, or to, you know, for the little ones to start up in the spring. So that's something to think about too. But I try to clean up as much by cutting back my gardens of perennials as much as I can, because in the spring it's a very busy time for me. Okay, who else? Yes, sir.
Did you fence the yard to keep the deer out?
No, I keep dogs. The dogs keep the deer out. Because even little Daphne, the corgi, who's only this tall, she would leave urine scent there, and there's a message for the deer: I am a wolf. The deer really are quite easy to confuse. Yes, sir.
What's the range of pH in your soil in your garden?
Good question. Because my soil is so full of compost because I've been gardening in the same place since 1970 when I bought the house. Well, I didn't get my back field, which I've turned into the main part of the garden, until the 80s. But still, 40 years of adding compost. My soil is relatively neutral, about 6.8. My blueberries won't produce fruit. They'll grow like crazy, but they won't produce fruit unless the soil is very acidic. So I add sulfur to my blueberry patch. But it's a good question because you should know the pH of your soil. Go down to Aubuchon's or someplace and get a little kit for $5 or $7 that you take a little bit of, they give you a little test tube, you put some soil in there, you add some water, and there's a little pill that you open up and you drop that and then you shake it and you wait 60 seconds and then it turns a color and you compare it to the chart on the package and it tells you is it acidic, is it alkaline, and what should you do to change it if you want. So mostly we're trying to make our soil less acidic for most plants and vegetables. We'd like it in between 6.2 and 6.8, so lightly acidic, except for the blueberries and cranberries and a few other things. Rhododendrons and azaleas like it a little acidic. But most things, I don't know of any plant that needs it above 7.0, which is neutral. Who else has a question? Yes?
Could you, like, what would be good references to buy some good bulbs and plants? Because I'm finding when I go to the garden stores, it's just mostly the normal stuff. And
Are you going to the big box stores like Home Depot,
No,
or you
no,
you have a
just very
nursery?
Yeah, just local nurseries, and they
Huh.
don't have a big variety.
Well, for bulbs, Becky and Brent and Becky bulbs down in New Jersey. It's a family-run business. I don't tend to buy perennials because I have some real good garden centers in Vermont that I'm right on the Vermont border. But I have good nurseries. I can get unusual things. I was at Edgewater Farm in Plainfield, New Hampshire yesterday, and they have 20 greenhouses and they grow wonderful stuff. They're pretty much, the greenhouses are all shut down, but they have a farm stand. They had some primroses I'd never tried before. I tried once many years ago and they didn't work. But they gave me a bunch. Just said, here, try these at the end of the season, take some home, whatever. I said, thanks, yeah. So I had a spot in my primrose garden, I put them in. Digging Dog Nursery in California has a very wide range of plants. And they do ship. I have gotten some from them. I collect plants of certain genuses, of certain families. So sometimes I can't get what I'm looking for. I'll read about something in a book. I say, oh, I really want that Sanguisorba. And I can usually find it at Digging Dog.
What is it called?
Digging Dog Nursery.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, well, Liz.
I do have your Cobra tool
Good.
that I bought a few years ago in Manchester when you were speaking. Wow.
Yeah, the Cobra Head Weeder. I'm sorry, I just got a shipment in last week and I was planning on selling them here today and I left them home.
No, how do we get them?
Huh?
Now how do we get them?
Well, are you the person that last time wanted?
Yeah, I'm going to check them today.
Okay, so what we're gonna do, come see me afterwards. I will mail you a Cobra Head and the,
We can come pick it up. Love to see it.
okay. I'm not around much during the day. I'm off doing things. But anyway, come see me afterwards and we'll work something out.
Thank you.
And I also have a used one in my car. So if you want to use one, they don't wear out. They last forever. So that would be a lot easier than mailing. And I'll give you a deal on it.
What is that handle made out of? I mean, it's
Recycled pop bottles.
It's amazing.
Yeah, blue plastic handle made from recycled pop bottles. They're made in Wisconsin, family-run business. Man and his wife and his 2 kids are the staff. And they're made in America. They don't send things out to China. It's really wonderful to see. And they've been in business for about 25 or 30 years. I met Noel Valdez, the inventor of it, out at the California, San Francisco Flower Show. And I told him I was a garden writer. He said, oh, here, take one of these home, try it out, you'll love it. Well, I did love it. I loved it so much I started to become a Cobra Head dealer. I buy them wholesale, sell them retail.
Is it a weeder?
It's the weeding tool is shaped like this, like a bent finger. The handle is this long, curves around, and you can push it down. It gets under the weed. And you can loosen the soil, so you're grabbing up here on the weed and you're pulling from below.
Nice.
Because how many times do you pull at a weed and you hear snap?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And I use it to plant my tomatoes. I use it to stir up the soil to plant bulbs. I can pull back the soil on my lawn to plant one crocus at a time. I can just push it in, pull back, drop in a bulb, push it back over.
Do you have an address where we can order them?
CobraHead.com.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But also try your local garden center. Many garden centers are now selling them.
You've got some new ones. Oh, you're.
Right, but the trouble is shipping. You know, to mail, for me to mail you something is gonna cost me $6 probably.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think they're 28 online, and he eats some of the shipping cost, and I sell them for 25. But the shipping is an issue. With books, you get a book rate, and it's not too bad. But merchandise, it's gotten very expensive to ship things to the U.S. mail.
Do you have an address or something so we can order your books that you have?
Are you online? Do you
Yeah.
use a computer? Just Google Henry Homeyer, and you'll see that you go to gardening-guy.com, and that's my website. I have the articles are right there, and there is a contact Henry button, I think, and but my email address is very simple. It's just my name, henry.homeyer@comcast.net. In fact, I might have it as the next slide.
Okay.
P.O. Box 364. Oh yeah, that's right. I live Cornish Flat, New Hampshire.
Did you have an earlier edition of that book, or that?
It's now in its second printing, a third
Okay.
printing, but same
Henry,
cover.
I use mine a lot.
The overhead or the book.
I think I have that.
You signed it for me.
Oh yeah, good.
Did you bring any today? For sale?
I left them home. I left them by the front door. I was working this morning in a garden, and I was waiting for a piece of heavy equipment to come and do something. And long story short, I got home late. I had time just to get clean, get dressed, jump in the car and come here. So I tried to organize everything. I put everything, and then I was saying goodbye to the dog, and I walked out the door and left the Cobra heads and the books sitting by the side of the house, inside. Well, I think it's about time for me to go home. It's 20 after 4. I'll take a couple more questions. Who has not asked a question yet? Anybody? All right, go ahead and ask another question.
The Hellebores that you showed,
Yes.
are they also called Trillium?
No.
They're not.
No, Trillium is a wildflower. Hellebore is a commercially produced cultivar.
Lenten rose.
Lenten rose is another name for,
Yes.
and there's also Christmas rose, which blooms even earlier. Thank you. All right, well, thanks for turning up today, and maybe we'll see you again next year.
Thank you.